Tanse, and welcome back to Indigenous Projects and Events Speakers Bureau YouTube channel. My name is Natasha Delany, and I am the Executive Director here at Indigenous Projects Events. So this YouTube channel series is all about our amazing Indigenous speakers, and today we have an incredible guest. Her name is Samantha Matters, and Samantha is co-founder and principal futurist at Eras Foresight and Consulting Corp. She is Métis and is a visionary leader who blends environmental science, strategic foresight, and Indigenous knowledge to guide organizations toward more sustainable, inclusive, and intentional futures. With a background in Indigenous consultation, policy development, and science outreach, she has worked extensively to center ancestral wisdom and collective responsibility in shaping the world ahead. She's been recognized as a Future of Canada Project Fellow and NGFP Fellow, and has even spoken on Indigenous Futures panel at the Dubai Future Forum. Sam is deeply connected to shifting the conversation around corporate futuring into one that prioritizes community-driven, ethical, and sustainable futures. So today we're going to dive into her journey, the power of Indigenous foresight, and how we can all play a role into shaping a better future. So let's just get into it. Hi, Samantha.
Hi.
So nice to have you here joining us today. So for our listeners, can you share with us, your Indigenous background and where you come from and, a little bit of how you grew up?
Yeah, sure. And thank you so much for that introduction. Tanshe, Samantha Matters, Dishinakashon, Métis, Yan, P. Mokintis, Ni Weekend. Hello, everyone. My name is Samantha Matters. As Natasha mentioned, I am Métis, and I am currently living in Calgary on Treaty 7 territory. Yeah, my background. So I'm Métis on my mom's side of the family. Our family has roots in the Middle Lake region of Saskatchewan. So that's where, a lot of my relatives live currently. And then on my dad's side of the family, our ancestors came to Alberta from Scotland and England a few generations ago. So I grew up in a mixed household. And I definitely am someone who's very much reconnecting with my Métis family and with that side of my heritage and culture. I'm still meeting uncles and cousins at this adult age that I've never met before. And yeah, just trying to, reintegrate with that side of my family. We definitely grew up more with my dad's relatives and those aunts and uncles and cousins. So I'm really conscious that, that journey of reconnection is a responsibility that I carry. And I'm really happy that I get to do that, with my siblings and with my mom to some extent as well. Having her kind of experience of being disconnected from family and kin and culture in Saskatchewan. So that has really, I would say, shaped a lot of how I show up in my work today, and has also really shaped, kind of my journey through education and just various career pathways as well.
Yeah, as a fellow Indigenous person that, also grew up disconnected from culture, when was the moment when or time period in your life where you realized that this was the direction that you wanted to go? You wanted to go towards the direction and take that journey of reconnecting and learning more. When was that moment for you?
I think that moment really solidified for me when I went to university for the first time. So I'm someone who is the first person in my family to attend university. So that was a really big kind of, just like challenge and new experience that I really had nothing to draw from, right? And I ended up going to the University of Alberta Augustana campus in Camrose, Alberta, which is a really small university, and had a really incredible Indigenous students office. So I was kind of, in this place where I didn't know anyone, I didn't have friends who came to that school with me. I was kind of figuring out what it meant to be in university, how to navigate that space and that institution. And I kind of just made my way to the Indigenous students office just to kind of connect with who else might be on campus. And that's where I really, I started making friends. I found a lot of support there and just, coming to understand what it is to be in university and how to navigate that. And that really got me connected, to events that were happening on campus. So I got to volunteer to host a round dance at our university. And that was my first experience ever with a round dance and kind of community in that way. I got to meet other Indigenous students who were also kind of having similar challenges that I was. And I also got to just start to think about what does it mean to make space in my learning journey at university, to do some of that work of reconnecting as well. So how could I, use my education as a pathway and a tool to help me, learn more about just Indigenous communities of that area, but also, my own culture and kin as well. And that's what, really allowed me then to kind of go home and, talk more to my mom and talk to my sister about it and my brother and, really kind of make that a more intentional part of my life. So I kind of had to, leave home, leave family, and then find some new community in a new place. And that really kind of set me down that path.
Yeah, I really feel like, in my mind, what it means to be Indigenous, being raised in foster homes that were non-Indigenous, very colonized, and then just reconnecting, like I'm 37 now and reconnecting at 6 years ago, so 31, never having stepped into a sweat lodge or, done anything like that. And then continuing that journey within the community, I've really found just within myself that culture what Indigenous means is really about like just the teachings, right? The teachings and the overall mental perspectives of ourselves and our connection to the world. Like that to me is the most important aspect of what it means to embrace and be Indigenous. Like it doesn't really matter how dark we are or how many generations ago, like it really is that mindset and that thinking perspective part.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that, what I've been able to learn from elders, from Indigenous youth, from, Indigenous business owners like yourself, I think that has really been the most impactful for me as a person, despite having an undergrad degree, having a master's degree, those lessons from, people in my community are what really has shaped how I understand my work today and how I want to move in the world. So I totally agree. It's about those teachings and just learning how to just move in a good way through this world and through this life. And that's really kind of what I hold on to, especially as, I find myself in really professionalized spaces or, kind of like I did a stint in government. I like to say it's kind of my first career pathway, really holding on to that to just, remember to always kind of be moving towards my purpose and to be moving towards something for the collective and for the community. And just really keeping that in mind always.
I totally like resonate with that. Apologies. So because some of our clients, like we have University of Calgary, and we're planning this very large event for them, and it's such a corporate. Well, it's an organizational post-secondary institution. It's a very hierarchical. I don't know if that's the right word to say it. And so like when it comes to like decolonizing these workspaces, and making space for Indigenous leaders and Indigenous ways of knowing, being, doing, and connecting, it is so difficult with a lot of these capitalist organizations, right? Because it things can't get done in that way of thinking with our way of thinking, right? And if we could just be like, but if you just let go and allow, it will get done, right? But that's just, it's not like, we're so time based, right? In the capitalistic colonized westernized world. And so I totally resonate with that, and finding, that balance between the two, right? Because you have to, otherwise you can't make it as an Indigenous business if you're not able to find that balance.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was actually just speaking with a friend, another Indigenous business owner yesterday, about finding that balance and, really wanting to work with organizations who get it and who are flexible and who are willing to engage in that way, but then also trying to find, a way to meet people where they're at. And I always try to remember that when I'm working with clients, is that I am working with another person. We're working in a person-to-person kind of way. Yes, this is a person who works in this institution that can feel really rigid and really challenging and sometimes really harmful, to be honest. But I try to find, space within myself to remember that's another person that I can try to connect with, and to, just think of my own kind of journey of, learning about my family and culture, and having to come up against some really difficult things, right? Like having to confront some really, awful memories and histories, and kind of recalling how disorienting that can be for you as a person, how destabilizing that can be, how you can kind of be flooded with, emotion and overwhelm when you start to realize that, the world is a much different place than maybe you thought it was, or you were taught to believe it was. And I try to see that in the people that I work with as well. When we're coming up against these really challenging truths and histories about Canada, when we're, just starting to do some of that learning, when we're finding out that maybe we've been moving in a way that has been harmful to people, remembering that can be really impactful on an individual level, and trying to just find a way to move through that with people. I like to integrate a lot of the lessons that I've learned just as an individual, who's had to navigate those experiences, and doing that in therapy, for example. So I bring a lot of what I learn as an individual in therapy into my professional practice as well, to kind of, again, hold space for that emotion and try to figure out how we can process that together, and do it in a slower way, I think, than professional institutions kind of require of us. So yeah, totally about finding that balance, and, meeting people where they're at, but also, being conscious that we need to protect our own wellness as well as we do that.
And so this is exactly how creative works, where like you literally just shifted my whole world, because that is something that me and my other team members have been struggling with, and your answer is just super helpful for me going forward. So thank you for that. So can you share what inspired you to co-found Eras? Is that it's Eras?
Eras, yeah.
Eras Foresight and Consulting Corp.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this has a lot to do just with some of my experiences in previous workplaces. I mentioned I worked in government, I worked in science outreach, I worked in the nonprofit space, and never really feeling like there was a good fit for me, like never really feeling like a sense of fulfillment in the work, oftentimes feeling really like tokenized in a lot of ways, which was a really weird experience for me, as someone who is reconnecting and as someone who is white as well. And just thinking about, the kind of life that I want outside of my work and alongside my work. So Eras is really, my attempt to create a career and a professional life that will make room for the other goals that I have in my life. So, for example, I'm someone who wants to have children, and I want to be raising my kids, right? I don't want to be kind of leaving them with someone and going off for 8 hours a day and then coming back home. I'm trying to create a working environment where my kids can be with me, and I can have, grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles here helping me do that. So that's part of it. But the other part around Eras, myself and my co-founder, Jackie Shaw, have been working together collaboratively for 6 years now. And we were kind of noticing in our work, that some of this really important work that's happening, especially in the DEI and anti-racism space, has kind of been losing a bit of traction lately. And I think that, well, as far as we have observed, we're seeing that, people are looking for something that's really meaningful and goes beyond just, intro to anti-racism workshop. So we're thinking about how do we take some of those, really important concepts. So DEI, anti-racism, how do we take some of our teachings around, interconnectedness and collectivity that we have from community, and how do we embed those into workplaces rather than just kind of laying them over top something that already exists? So Eras Foresight and Consulting is really about making that type of transformative change with purpose-driven organizations. So we work with our clients to really understand, how do we take something like DEI or interconnectedness, and how do we really embed that in the organization across all levels, of whether it's a hierarchical organization or a more horizontal organization. How do we identify what's really preventing us from embedding those and practicing those concepts and those values? And how do we start to remove some of those barriers so that we can really practice and engage and work in a different way? Again, ultimately moving us all towards a better collective future.
First of all, that's awesome. Second of all, what are you finding is the challenge for real organizational change?
I think what I have noticed, in kind of the past 8 to 10 years of being in this kind of space is that, so for example, someone who wants to, engage Indigenous perspectives in their work, we view that as kind of an add-on or laying over activity, but we never really understand the kind of worldview that's guiding that client or that organization that would really prevent them from engaging with an Indigenous perspective, with Indigenous community even, in a meaningful way, because we haven't taken the time to really understand ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that for me, that's where I find a lot of my strength in the work, is working with those clients who might have really good intentions, who have really good goals and values, but haven't done the work to look internally and do that kind of inward reflection to say, what is the worldview that's guiding us here? Like, are we in pursuit of that kind of capitalistic goal where time is money and, that's the only thing of value? How is that preventing us from engaging with a community or, with a perspective that is so much different, that might be rooted around, again, those ideas of community and collectivity? And, how is that actually the barrier itself and not necessarily your hiring process, for example? Maybe your hiring process is a barrier, but maybe it's that underlying worldview that's kind of preventing you from seeing the value that someone who is very different from you would bring into your organization.
So I have chills. We're literally so on the same wavelength here in this topic. I totally agree. A lot of it is so unconscious because we only know what we know, right? We only grow up knowing that we know, and we don't want to believe that we have negative thought patterns or that we are racist, or we don't want to believe these things. But we come from a world of racism. We really do. Me growing up, that was my struggle with even doing anything Indigenous, right? Was because I grew up in a non-Indigenous home who they believed that they weren't racist. They were helping us. They were helping us, little Indigenous children, right? But they would lock the doors when they passed by the reserve. There were these things that were being done, and the words didn't match the action or the energy, right? And so when I was finishing my business degree, and I read this article by Robert Livingston, this Black, I don't know if he's a doctorate in business, and he something about racism within the workplace. And it completely changed my life, because he was literally explaining everything that I had experienced but couldn't put into words, in terms of what unconscious bias and racism actually really is. And so I feel like we can have a further conversation even past this about some work that that Indigenous projects and events is doing that interlines with the work that we're doing, where it's really about you're right, there's lots of organizations that have, truth and reconciliation strategies. They have a lot of, they do, and what we're doing is more Indigenous focused. And so they have, cultural awareness programs. They have all of these, maybe they do a blanket exercise or a sharing circle, or, they do these things in the classroom. But how can we really shift the mindset to an actual true understanding of what we were talking about at the beginning? We're shifting the actual way of thinking, the actual perspective. And the only way that I learned to do that when reconnecting to the culture was actually doing the thing, actually going to the sweat lodge, actually understanding why we, with sweetgrass, break off piece and put them on each rock as they're burning before they go into the lodge, right? So these little things and ways of doing that we do, and how they are so significant in our overall way of thinking and being, right? How can we have corporate world understand this, and how profound it really is, right? And so that's something that we're working on over here. And yeah, I definitely believe that that's something that we could continue having a conversation about, and seeing how we can work together going forward. So as a facilitator, how do you create safe, inclusive, and transformative spaces for groups navigating complex topics like Indigenous futures and sustainability?
Yeah, so I think for me, this comes back to that idea of time that we were talking about, and how we're just in a rush all the time. So as a facilitator, I really like to bring a very slow and easy kind of energy to the spaces that I'm holding for people. So I let people know that right off the bat, that this is going to feel very different from a meeting or from a conference or any of these other spaces that you might attended. And I do that by taking care to open the space in a good way. So that means for me, I'll take some time, before I even interact with people, to smudge and make sure I'm feeling really centered and really grounded in my purpose. And then we'll take a really long time to do introductions. So I'll introduce myself. I'll kind of share, a bit like I did today, about my own background and where I come from. And then I'll invite everyone in the room to do the same, to kind of share and introduce themselves in whatever way feels comfortable. And taking time to make sure we all have our coffee or our tea or our snacks with us, really encouraging people to be comfortable in the space. If I can, I like to have a more relaxed space where we can sit on the floor or on a couch, or kind of spread out outside of that like boardroom energy where we're all sitting up so straight, and just really setting the tone of the day with a sense of ease in myself, and inviting others to find that. And by starting from that place of like slowness and ease, and inviting people to maybe, be a little bit more vulnerable than you have been in your workplace in the past, even if it's just sharing, just a little bit about yourself, having that before we get into, some of that heavier content, really helps, I think, people just find, again, that sense of ease that they can bring to it, that understanding that this is new to me, and maybe I've never heard or learned this before, but that's okay, because I'm in this space where I'm being held, and where there is this stillness and ease that maybe I can explore a little bit more deeply than I would be comfortable with if we were, on a really strict, tight agenda and there wasn't space for me to kind of, feel welcomed here. So as a facilitator, I really like to kind of avoid really strict timetables or agendas. I really like to just let the day flow as it needs to. I fully believe that the conversations that need to happen will happen if we set that space in a good way, and we let people kind of come into it wherever they're at. the conversations that we need to have, we will have, and we don't need to stick to, you know, a minute by minute agenda to get there. They'll come to us if we kind of, you know, make room for them.
Awesome. So as a futurist, first of all, actually explain futurist.
Yeah, this is definitely, you know, we just recently launched Eras, and as we were building out our website, we were talking about having a frequently asked question page, and this was the first one that we thought we had to put up was, what is a futurist? Because it is a very strange kind of title and space. And yeah, something that I didn't really come across until I went back to school to do my master's degree. But really, a futurist is somebody who is kind of looking around and observing the world for signals and trends and analyzing those trends to think about what are the potential futures that might come from, you know, where we are today. So we look around, we see what's going on, and then we kind of project into the future. And we're not trying to predict the outcome or predict what the future will be. What we're trying to do is say, here's a range of things or trajectories that we could go down. How can we start to think about, you know, which one of these possibilities is preferable for us? And if we can identify that preferred future, what are the steps then that we have to take to move towards it, while being aware of, you know, all of these other possibilities that are around us at all times. So it's really about, yeah, using, you know, we're kind of trained with these various tools and methods to think about, you know, how we do that gathering up of signals and how we analyze the trends and how we think about what the possibilities are. But in my practice, I also really like to think about our histories as well, and think about, you know, how did we get to where we are today, and how is the past also informing our futures? Because I think it's really easy for us to kind of forget about the things that happened, especially when I look at, you know, kind of how history repeats itself in a lot of ways, and some of the patterns that we've seen just in Canada, you know, as this very young nation, some of the histories that we've seen repeat themselves. So I always try to bring that into my work as an Indigenous futurist as well.
Okay, so now that you've explained that, and to be honest, it kind of reminds me of like anxiety in Inside Out, where she's like looking at all of the different possible scenarios, except without like the anxiety, like actually like calculated. And
yeah, I try to leave the anxiety out, but I mean, yeah, it creeps in a little bit.
So how do you see the role of public speaking and facilitation evolving in the next 10 or 20 years, especially in relation to Indigenous and community-led initiatives?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, actually. And I think one thing that I have been noticing is that there is so much incredible work happening, especially led by Indigenous youth in their communities, that is just happening, you know, outside of, you know, whatever's happening in government at the moment, or whatever the big trend is in technology. Like, the work is happening and is being led by Indigenous youth and Indigenous communities. And a lot of people don't really know about those kind of projects or that really awesome work that's happening. You know, I'm thinking a lot in terms of the clean energy space and kind of clean energy transitions and projects that are happening right now in community that a lot of people just aren't aware of right now. So I think in the next 10 years, we might start to see some of that work become a little bit more visible to a larger population and really become a source of not just inspiration, but guidance for what is possible, right? Like
sounds like leadership even within those spaces.
Yeah, totally. Like, I think because as Indigenous nations and communities, I think we are inherently futurists, and we always have in mind what's coming, you know, not just for us in the next 5 or 10 years, but generations from now. And we're always doing that work in service of those generations. So I do think, you know, in a lot of ways, we really are leaders in terms of what our world is going to look like in
Mhm.
20, 50, 100 years. And I think over the next 10 years, in terms of facilitations and keynotes, I think these stories are just going to come more to light. And we're really going to start to see Indigenous communities, Indigenous nations, Indigenous young people really take that position of leadership and of, kind of providing that guidance in a world that I think is going to get a little bit more turbulent even than it is right now.
That's super exciting to think about. Like, and I feel like, we're always going through, like, collectively as a world, like, turbulence in some way. Like, how long ago was COVID, right?
Yeah.
And then prior to that, there was something. So really, talking about that standing inner knowing, that more and more Indigenous communities, Indigenous people, and Indigenous youth are embracing. I absolutely agree with you in terms of that future. So, what do you have coming up this year? It's 2025. What are the next, workshops that you're doing, facilitating, speaking opportunities? Do you have anything booked? What's next for you?
Yeah, so this is kind of the first official year for Eras Foresight and Consulting. So for me, for 2025 is just continuing to build up this business and really, bring it into the world and introduce it to as many people as I can. But we also have some really exciting work lined up already for Eras. So one project I'll mention is we're working currently with Policy Horizons Canada, which is the Futures and Foresight arm of the Government of Canada. And they're really interested in how they can start to be more inclusive of Indigenous perspectives in their work. So we're working with them again to do some of that pre-work around understanding what's the worldview that's at play here, what are the limitations to including Indigenous perspectives in your work, and then how can we start to move around some of those barriers. So we're actually going to be working with them for the next 3 years to kind of go pretty deeply into that process and start to hopefully see more Indigenous representation and inclusion in some of the futures that, Policy Horizons is imagining for the Government of Canada and for Canada at large. So that's really exciting. I also have coming up in March, I've been invited to speak at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas on Indigenous futures, which is really exciting. So I'll be able to, kind of, represent a Métis perspective, kind of a more northern perspective, I guess you could say, as compared to Austin, Texas, on that big stage as well. So that's something I'm really excited about too.
That's awesome. Well, so much, respect for the work that you're doing, and so excited for all of the opportunities that you have and that are coming your way in this year, 2025 and onwards. Thank you so much for joining us. If any of our viewers are wanting to book Samantha, you can find her information and speaking topics at www.indigenousprojectsevents.com. Samantha, where can people also find you? Do you have a website?
I do. You can find me at erasforesight.co. We have a booking page there where we invite you to come for a visit with us. That's complimentary. You can book a 30-minute meeting with me and Jackie at any time, to talk about a project you have in mind, to learn more about what we do, or we also just invite people to come chat with us. We love visiting. So bring your tea, come for a visit, and we'd love to have you.
Awesome. And then you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Is there any?
I am. You can find me at all of those places, just at Samantha Matters.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And come back for another episode. Press share, press like, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.
Amazing.
I can cut this out, but it's not ending.